There's a moment you never talk about. The quiet moment that happens right before you react. Right before you agree to something you don't want. Right before you pretend you're okay. Right before you silence your own truth just to keep the peace. It's that flicker, that split-second tug inside your chest where the real you tries to surface and the trained you pushes it back down. You don't do this because you're weak. You do it because at some point in your life, it kept you safe. Self-erasure was not a flaw. It was a strategy, and it worked. But here's the uncomfortable truth about human behavior. The very strategies that once kept you alive are now the ones quietly destroying you. You learned to read people more than you read yourself. You learned to shrink so others could expand. You learned to anticipate danger and every emotional shift. You learned to build an internal world where your needs were negotiable, optional, irrelevant. And now, as an adult, you're trying to live with a nervous system that still believes you're in the same room you grew up in. The same rules, the same threats, the same hierarchy of who gets to matter. This is the paradox. The behaviors that once protected you now imprison you. You keep wondering why you feel anxious, exhausted, disconnected, resentful. You keep thinking something is wrong with you, but nothing is wrong with you. You are simply living according to an old script, a script written by fear, necessity, and survival. Today, we're going to talk about the part of human behavior no one wants to accept. Most of what we call personality is just habit dressed up as trauma. And until you understand the hidden wound behind your behavior, you will keep repeating the same patterns, not because you want to, but because your body thinks it's the only way to stay safe.
To understand the root of this pattern, we have to talk about a few psychological concepts that shape how humans learn survival. 1. Hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is not simply being alert. It is the nervous system living in a constant scanning, watching people's tone, body language, micro-expressions, the way someone closes a door, the pause before they answer. Hypervigilance turns your entire identity into a radar. It trains you to respond, not express. It makes you feel responsible for preventing emotional storms. As a child, this meant safety. As an adult, it becomes exhaustion, a kind of psychological burnout that you can sense but can never fully explain. 2. Attachment conditioning. Not attachment styles, but attachment conditioning. This is the invisible programming that teaches you what will keep you loved and what will get you rejected. Maybe you learned being quiet meant safety, being helpful meant acceptance, having no needs meant affection, becoming low maintenance meant survival. Humans adapt to the emotional economy of their childhood. Whatever earned you connection back then becomes your default behavior now. 3. The Default Mode Network, DMN. Neurologically, the DMN is the brain's internal storytelling system, the network that decides how you interpret yourself, your past, your fears. When children grow up suppressing their own needs, the DMN becomes oriented around self-monitoring rather than self-experiencing. You don't live your life, you watch yourself living it. You don't express emotions, you evaluate them. You don't ask for help, you predict disappointing outcomes. It is a self-protective loop, but it also keeps you emotionally disconnected from your true self. Putting it all together, you become someone who acts from an unconscious script. You apologize when you've done nothing wrong. You anticipate rejection where none exists. You silence yourself before anyone asks you to. You treat your own desires like inconveniences because somewhere in your past, your body learned that being less was the safest way to be loved. This is not your personality. This is conditioning. This is survival wiring. This is the unseen architecture behind human behavior.
There's a price for living this way, a price you've been quietly paying for years. You pay it in loneliness, even when you're surrounded by people. You pay it in overthinking because your brain is convinced that being unprepared is a threat. You pay it in resentment because you're giving from a place of fear, not freedom. You pay it in self-doubt because your internal compass was never allowed to develop naturally. You pay it in the grief of never being fully known. And that's the part nobody likes to admit. Most humans are grieving a self they never got to be. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." He understood that wholeness requires the courage to face the parts of you that were punished, ignored, or misunderstood. The emotional cost of your survival patterns is this: you abandoned your authenticity to receive belonging, and now you belong to everyone except yourself. You went quiet before anyone asked you to. You softened your truth to avoid inconvenience. You carried burdens that were never yours. You learned to smile while suppressing entire storms. And the fear underneath it all? The fear that if you show the real you, you will lose the people you worked so hard to keep. That fear shapes your choices. It shapes your relationships. It shapes your voice, your posture, your dreams. You don't just fear vulnerability. You fear being seen, because being seen once meant danger. This is the uncomfortable truth about human behavior. We don't avoid pain. We avoid whatever once preceded pain, even if those conditions no longer exist.
So, how does this childhood wiring show up in adulthood? How does the self-erasure you learned become the identity you live? Here are the patterns most people never recognize. 1. You apologize for existing. You say sorry when you take up time, space, attention, or emotional room, because somewhere inside you believe your presence is a burden. 2. You over-explain your feelings. You treat emotions like a crime scene, as if you need proof, justification, and evidence just to feel what you feel. 3. You attract people who benefit from your silence. Manipulators, takers, emotional avoiders, they gravitate toward those who don't enforce boundaries. 4. You struggle to trust good things. Calmness feels suspicious. Love feels fragile. Safety feels temporary. 5. You overfunction in relationships and jobs. You become the problem solver, the emotional caretaker, the one who holds everything together, not because you want to, but because you fear what happens if you don't. 6. You stay loyal to situations that drain you. You confuse familiar with safe. If chaos was normal, you stay with chaos. If emotional distance was normal, you tolerate emotional crumbs. And here is the critical truth. These are not personality traits. These were coping mechanisms. You learned them, and that means you can unlearn them. The first step is witnessing the pattern, not shaming yourself, not gaslighting yourself with, "It's not a big deal," not intellectualizing your pain. Witnessing means saying, "This behavior protected me once, but it is hurting me now." And when you can do that, even for a second, the pattern begins to crack. Healing does not begin with fixing yourself. Healing begins with finally listening to yourself. Here is what the path looks like. 1. Inner child reparenting. This isn't about being childish. It's about giving your nervous system the safety it never received.
It means speaking to yourself with the gentleness no one taught you. 2. Shadow work. This is where you reclaim the parts of you that you pushed into the dark because they were inconvenient for others. Your anger, your needs, your desires, your boundaries, your voice. 3. Choosing softness instead of self-punishment. Softness is not weakness. Softness is precision. Softness is presence. Softness is finally believing you do not need to fight yourself to exist. A final philosophical lens. Nietzsche once wrote, "One must have chaos within to give birth to a dancing star." The chaos inside you was never a flaw. It was a message, a compass, a story waiting to be understood. The ultimate truth. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are not unworthy. You are simply living with a nervous system shaped by environments that never saw your full humanity. But now you see it. You are witnessing yourself, and that is the beginning of transformation. If this message resonated with you, if you recognized even a fragment of your own story in these words, then you are already beginning the work of becoming whole. Because the goal is not to become a different person. The goal is to return to the person you were before the world taught you to shrink. Thank you for watching. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe if you want more deep dives into the truths most people are too afraid to confront. You are not here to be small. You are here to be real, and that is enough.